So good afternoon and welcome to Charter Directors Meeting. We're glad you're here. This is our much anticipated legislative training today. We're going to go over those legislative updates. And then we've got a few other topics today. We have some quick updates about legislative session with library updates. We've got School Land Trust, and then our directors training this month done by the Association of Public Charter Schools as well. So like I said, lots of great information, a packed meeting. So without further ado, we will turn the time over to Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings and Policy Advisor Elise Newey for our legislative updates.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. And Marie, hopefully you can hear me. All right.
Yes, we can hear you
Great.
and see you. Everything's working well.
Perfect. I have been having some technical difficulties this morning. I had an unfortunate incident with my laptop. So I'm using a loaner laptop, which has unfortunately not been my friend this morning. But I think I got all the kinks worked out. And the very good news is we've got Elise Newey, who's USBE policy advisor and new to some of you and maybe a familiar face for others. So if for some reason at any point during this meeting, if I disconnect or drop off or freeze, Elise is prepared to take over and keep things running smoothly. Also, Elise is going to be the one who will be sharing screen and sharing slides. So just to begin with, I wanted to just introduce myself first, because there might be some of you who I've never met, but I'm Angie Stallings. I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Policy with the Utah State Board of Education, and I work as the legislative liaison in a lot of ways for the state board and Superintendent Dixon. And Elise Newey, she is the USBE policy advisor. She and I are there on the Hill pretty much every day during the session. Elise has been in her current role for about a year, and before that used to be with School Land Trust section. So you may have worked with her before when she was in School Land Trust. So Elise is a former teacher. I believe you primarily focused on 5th grade, Elise, but maybe you could share more of your teaching background when you start speaking. And then after teaching, she went to law school, and she has a JD as well as I do. So why don't we just go ahead and jump right into to what we're going to be discussing today, which is the legislative session. I would welcome any comments. And first, actually, before we start out by talking about the legislative session, I would love it if you all could give me and Elise an idea of any bills that you are most interested in, you want to make sure we cover, or any specific questions you have, whether it's a bill related question or funding related question. We'll be happy to do that. And so go ahead and right now it would be best if we could get them all in there right now as much as we can, so we make sure and don't miss certain bills or funding questions, but also just know that we both love to take questions as we go. So you can ask questions related to the bill or the funding item we're discussing. Don't hesitate. If it's better, Marie, I don't know if there's a preference of it being written in the chat, or if we can also accommodate verbal questions. I appreciate both. So is there any preference?
Any style that you like.
Okay. Okay. So if you have a question, we may ask you to go ahead and have that question or your comments verbally. Also, just note that there may be some bills that you know more than Elise and I do about, like either you worked on it or you've been researching it since the session ended. If you have additional information you would like to add, or if there's anything we say that you're like, that's not what I understood, I thought it was this, please do not hesitate to raise your hand, share with us the information you have, or correct us if we say something wrong. I remember when I met with the HR directors, I was talking about a certain bill and I thought it went into effect beginning with July 1, 2027. And they're like, oh no, it's July 1, 2025. So I think sometimes my recollection or Elise's recollection might be an earlier version of a bill. And we forget that bills often change during the process. And so just please know we appreciate any insight that you also have to add to the conversation. We want this to be collaborative. Okay. And just before we start, I'm noticing in the chat that we've got school safety, weapons in schools. We've got implications of the juvenile justice update on discipline and conduct plans as a whole. That's great. School safety, some questions about school guardian, school fees questions, and then HB 335, the state grant process amendments. So that is wonderful. We'll make sure and touch on all of those. TSSP guidelines, we will talk about that. That's the teacher salary supplement program. And perfect. And we may also we'll take another break since we're with you. I think we have about 2 hours. Is that right, Marie, to go through?
Yep.
Okay, so we'll make sure and have a couple of breaks throughout where you guys can ask questions or give us some information, share, and then I will try and do our best to leave time for questions at the end as well. So let's just jump right in, and then as I stated, we'll give a lot of time for questions and for you all to give us feedback as well. I just see one more thing. Also, many of us count on USBE to provide model policy language for legislative updates. So anytime you know of work that USBE will do on this front, let us know. I will say that we're in some ways moving away from doing a lot of model policies, but we can discuss that more as we go as well, because it may be specific to the different areas. So thanks for that comment, Tess. All right, so 2024 legislative session, it was a roller coaster. It was fast and furious, and the numbers are going to show that. So if you felt like there were a lot of bills that we were tracking, just know that your feelings are validated, because we were tracking 273 bills. 166 of those bills passed, and of the 166 bills, 113 of those are covered in the bill book. And I wanted to share with you the difference in those numbers, because as you know, we have core education bills that impact, say, instruction or policies required in schools, specifically related to your role as a leader in schools. But then there's also the related bills, like HR related or zoning related, insurance liability related, things that people often don't think of as education bills, but they do impact you as an education leader, as your school, your employees, your students, your families, even though they're not core education. And so the 113 bills are bills that we identified as USBE staff, bills that you or us, that either USBE or LEAs will need to likely take some action related to those bills, or they might be something that comes up either in an employment setting or zoning or filing of certain reports. All right, next slide. Here's some good news. We got a lot of funding, and I do want to say how good this news is, because I've been talking to colleagues in other states, and many of them are facing big budget cuts, actually, where we are lucky enough that our legislature had the funding available to increase funding for us as a state. It's fabulous news. I think it was Washington, D.C. and Minnesota. They are both seeing huge cuts, like $200,000 or more per school in those areas. And so just right now, I know that a lot of the bills this session might have felt like heavy lifts, and there are going to be quite a few heavy lifts coming our direction. But if we can start with the good news right now of that the legislature was able to fund a 5% increase in the WPU, and in general, $803 million of new funding. And that includes $278 million of ongoing new funds and $525 million of one-time funds. So I think that is a celebration. I know that as LEA leaders, you probably feel like it wasn't nearly enough due to all the inflation and cost increases we've seen over the last year. But again, I just want to celebrate the fact that we are not facing budget cuts the way some of our colleagues in other states are. And there may be some budget cuts in certain line items, because when we'll talk about that in a moment, there are some line items that were taken away, but those funds you should be able to see those funds show up in another area like the at-risk add-on. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So, okay, next slide, Elise. This is numbers at a glance. Again, we already covered the $803 million of new funding. There are 62 new board rules that we are anticipating. And some of those might be amendments to the same rule. So when I say there's 62 rule amendments or enactments, that's 62 different instances of new rules, either amendments or enactments that we're anticipating, and not necessarily 62 rules in total. So for an example, HB 82 and HB 415 both have school fees amendments included. Both of those bills would impact changes to R277407. So you will have a couple of rules that might count 2 or 3 times in that 62. While I'm here talking about board rules, before I move on to the other numbers, I had someone reach out to me and ask me to highlight the fact that once the session ends, the State Board of Education and staff have a heavy lift updating all of these rules. And you'll see, if you haven't seen already, we had quite a full agenda in our committees in April, which was just last week. It was Friday, we had our committee meetings. In May and June, you're going to see large numbers of board rules that will be going to committee and before the board. And I let you know this because just as you might have been tracking bills up at the legislative session, now is the time to be watching the State Board of Education's agendas and looking at rule changes. And if you have feedback that you would like to give to USBE staff or board members directly, just know that these next couple of months, and then as well, August is another very heavy rule month, are the months to watch. If you have questions about how to access the state board's agenda, it's through something called Civic Clerk. If you go to our website and go to the board, all the way on the right-hand side at the very top of our landing page, you'll see board. Click on that. You can go to board meetings and you can access the agendas there on our website. In general, the State Board of Education meets the first Thursday and Friday of every month, with the full board meeting being on Thursday and the committee meetings being on Friday. If you have any questions about board rules, process, and timing, you can put them in the chat now, but just know that if you're interested in providing feedback on a rule in the same way that you might provide feedback on a bill, the next couple of months, now is the time to do it. All right, I'll keep moving. Next, we have 10 new programs, and I just want to state that when I say 10 new programs, and at least I'm actually still on that last slide, sorry. Some of them are existing programs with significant updates. So we'll go through all of those 10 programs as we go through today. 9 new reports for USBE, 7 new reports for school districts and charter schools. And we also have 7 RFPs that we're anticipating. Those are requests for proposals or new contracts or contract amendments that we'll be engaged with as a result of the session. All right, next slide. Here's, I'll try to just go through these funding highlights quickly, but again, if you have a specific question about funding, let me know. Many of these funding items will also be addressed later on when we get to the bill. So for example, this $150 million for the Excellence in Education and Leadership Program, we'll actually cover that in more detail when we talk about SB 173. There's $100 million in one-time funds for school safety, which we'll talk about when we get to HB 84. $1 million is going towards the K-12 property insurance pool. This would impact you if you are a school that participates in risk management or the state's insurance. The legislature funded $101 million one time to offset the high increased cost to insurance that came just as a result. Nationwide, insurance costs have just increased significantly. I've definitely noticed it with my own insurance and my car, etc. So it's a trend that I think is happening everywhere. $74 million for educator prep and collaboration time. That's the program for professional time that passed a number of years ago. So those dollars were increased, and we'll talk about some of the new changes to that program as well. Next slide. These are three new, well, especially the teacher retention and the stipends for educators. Those are two new programs. They are, the teacher retention is a pilot program. I believe the stipends for new educators is also a pilot, and will be providing stipends to student teachers. The educator expense modifications is providing additional funding for teacher supplies. Next slide. Some of the, so the early warning systems, and we'll talk about this more when we get to HB 84, but previously we've had a contract to support early warning systems, and we've had about 50 schools participate in that program. HB 84 now requires every school to have an early warning system. You're not required to use the USBE contracted service, but if you do, this $2.1 million is going to support the state's portion of that service. LEAs will be paying the other 50%. Also, the child sex abuse prevention program, again, we'll be talking that was related to SB 205, $1.5 million ongoing. So that will be every year. So the next one, the at-risk students WPU waiting phase-in. This one has an asterisk here because it, if you, hopefully many of you are aware that we have a couple of add-ons, like we have the special education add-on, we have the CTE add-on, WPU, and then we also have the at-risk students WPU add-on. This add-on program used to be EARS, or the enhancement for at-risk students. It was a line item. It was turned into an add-on, and it has been increasing every year, sometimes by 1%, sometimes by 2%. This, and when I say 1% or 2%, it's actually an increment of that the legislature is required legislatively to increase every year over 10 years until it gets to about $280 million. And so the last couple of years, the legislature has been doing 2 increments at a time. This year, they're just doing 1. But one of the reasons why I want to talk about this one specifically is the $27.9 million are not new funds, meaning this funding is coming from other line items that were cut. For example, the K-3 reading program, or what we call the early literacy program, that's about $15 million. That line item went away, and those $15 million were moved from that line item over to here in the at-risk student WPU add-on. So next slide, Elise. I think that this next slide might be, actually, can you go to the next one and I'll come back to this? One more, sorry. I figure as long as we're talking about the add-on, this is the group of programs that were cut and eliminated, repealed through SB2, and you can see those programs listed there. The funding for those programs didn't go away. They were moved over into that at-risk add-on, that $27.9 million. So the reason why I share this with you right now is you might have, for example, elementary school counselors. You might, in your school, you might have been receiving a grant under the elementary school counselor grant program previously. And now that that program has been cut, somebody might say, well, we're not going to have elementary school counselors anymore because that program was cut. That is a decision you could make. But just know that the funding related to that grant program was actually moved over into the at-risk add-on. And so you should have funding in the at-risk add-on to support these programs. You can choose to do that. You could choose to do more than you were getting under the line item. You could choose to do less. But I just wanted you to know that just because these programs were eliminated doesn't mean you don't have the funding you used to have. It's just in a different spot in that at-risk student add-on WPU. The same would be for early literacy. If you were using your early literacy funding to support, for example, paraprofessionals for reading interventions, it doesn't mean you can't continue to do that. You just need to go look at your at-risk student add-on, WPU add-on for those dollars. Are there any questions specifically on this slide about the impact of the repeals or the elimination of those line items? Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions. Do we need to add those early literacy or other activities to our at-risk plans that the governing boards approve? Yes, if there is a plan, and I guess I'm forgetting that you have to do an at-risk plan, but that would be a good place to put it because that's the dollars are going to be there in that at-risk WPU add-on. And so if you are choosing to use those dollars to pay for, say, paraprofessionals, for literacy interventions, you could be that you might fund after school programs for that, or an elementary school counselor, or intergenerational poverty. All of that would be an appropriate place to put in your at-risk add-on plan. But there are a lot less strings, quote unquote, with the at-risk add-on than you probably had in those individual line items. The other thing I wanted to mention, because LEAs, you all as leaders with your boards, have the ability to make your own determination about what an at-risk student is. So you are required actually to make that determination of what an at-risk student means for your LEA, and that will help guide how you use those funds. So you can make it as narrow or as broad as you'd like. So that if you do want to use those funds to support every single K through third grade student, for example, you would just want to include that for purposes of your LEA, at-risk students are students who are learning reading, right? Who are early readers, and that would work. All right. Let's go back, Elise, to the slide we were at. I think this is where we were at. Just again, some funding highlights on technology. There's a $2 million AI grant pilot program. This pilot program will be run out of GoEO, or what used to be called GoEd, and they will be partnering with at least one school on some AI technology. So if you're interested in being that school that's going to partner with a third party, you could reach out to GoEO. $7 million for the K-12 Computer Science Initiative. This is not a new program. It's been going for a while. It just keeps being funded with one-time funds every year. But the legislature did add $1 million of ongoing, as well as the $6 million one-time. Next slide. And we'll talk about school fees and some of the impacts of HB 415 in a moment, but the legislature did appropriate $36 million one time. The bill does require us to distribute those funds over 3 years. So we are going to be amending the school fees law later this year. Those funds will not begin to be distributed until fiscal year 26. So the 25-26 school year. We will not be distributing, at least there's no plan to right now distribute the school fee, those funds for fiscal year 24-25, because the school fees amendments that eliminate your ability to charge for certain fees doesn't take effect until July 1 of 2025. But we'll get to that in a moment. The Utah Fits All program was $40 million was added here. When we get to the Utah Fits All program, Bill, I'm going to give you some information. This program did change significantly as far as how you all support students who may want to enroll in a class or participate in any of your curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular activities. So we'll address that more when we get to HB 529. The High School Service Pilot Program is a pilot program that's being run and administered by the Department of Culture, and I'm sorry, forget the name, but it's a different agency. It's not USBE, but it's meant to provide service program or service opportunities for students in like junior, senior year. And that will be more information, I'm sure, will be coming as that agency rolls out that pilot program. And then, and there's no bill. Well, there is a bill. I apologize. There is a bill Senator Milner ran. We'll get to that later. And then last, the small and rural capital grants of 30 million ongoing. All right, next slide. I think this is the slide we already covered. Next slide, Elise. So, and I'm trying to remember, I'm pretty sure I'm covering this one. So Elise, just stop me if we get to a slide and I keep going. And again, if there are any other questions, keep putting them in the chat and we'll make sure to get them. I know that somebody a moment ago mentioned that they'd like to hear more about the TSSP changes. So this bill was a big one, and it impacted two programs, one existing, which is the Teacher Salary Supplement Program, and then the new Excellence in Education and Leadership Supplement Pilot Program. So first, let's talk about TSSP. This program is changing, hopefully in a lot of ways that you're going to be excited about, because it actually gives you as a school leader the opportunity to identify the highest needs that you have for your school when it comes to recruitment and retention. So as many of you probably know, the existing Teacher Salary Supplement Program, or TSSP, is meant to provide stipends for teachers in math, science, computer science, and for teachers who are special educators or work with students with disabilities. The new program is going to now allow each LEA to designate up to 5 areas of recruitment and retention needs that are needed in your area. And the new program goes into effect with the school year, the 25-26 school year. So you'll have 1 year to prepare yourself for that, because you will want to establish your own local policy on how you're going to designate those 5 areas. The other thing to keep to note, that this question came up when I met with HR directors. The question was, well, if we designate, say, let's say we do math teachers, special education, and maybe in your area, you're having a very hard time with arts teachers. I'm just going to throw those 3 out. But let's say that 3 to 5 years down the road, you no longer have a recruitment or a retention issue with your arts teachers, and now it's moved over into computer science. Can you change those categories? The answer is yes, but you'd want to make sure and let those educators know how long to anticipate those categories lasting. I don't think there's anything in the bill that says it's only every 3 years or every 5 years. I guess you could arguably do it annually, although you may not want to do that annually. But those would be the types of decisions you and your board would want to make about how you're going to establish the salary supplement for highly needed educators. And just so you know, our staff is planning to get a group of leaders from both charters and districts together to work on what this will look like and to identify needs as far as like, we're hoping we have a couple of LEAs who have policies that they'll be willing to share with each other, so that you can see how some of the different districts or charters are planning to designate your 5 areas. And so there will be support from our level. We've already identified a group of about 6 to 8 USBE staff that are going to just try and find out what kind of needs or ways that we can support you all. Because we know how much time and effort is taken at the State Board of Education level to manage this program. And I'm not trying to say this to like scare you or anything, but it is something you'll want to prepare for. But it's also a really great opportunity for you as a district, or as a charter and as a school, to be really intentional about where your recruitment and retention needs are. And the other thing I wanted to mention is the way this funding will come to you. Every district and charter school will receive an allocation under this salary supplement for highly needed educators, and then it will be up to you to determine those stipend amounts. At the very least, the expectation is that only 80% of the state funds makes up the stipend. So there is an expectation for local funds to be used as well to help support the stipends. But for example, right now, I believe the standard TSSP stipend is about $4,500 per year. You as an LEA would be able to determine whether you want that stipend to be higher or lower. You could probably even have differing stipend amounts for the different types of educators or areas. And these are all things that, again, will be fleshed out. We are anticipating creating a board rule, but we kind of want to get feedback from the field before we bring ideas or recommendations to the board for a rule. We want to hear what are the things that you all are seeing as issues that need to be addressed. So it looks like we have a hand from Ted. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, Angie, right now the TSSP, the state has set the criteria for it.
Correct.
The LEA set the criteria for receiving these funds.
That's correct. Yes. Well, it's not for what you receive as far as funding. Your allocation for funds is going to be set, right? There's a certain distribution that goes out. And then with your pot of money, you will be able to designate those up to 5 areas. And in those areas, you would be able to set the qualifications or the criteria for each of the areas. So for example, you may know that with TSSP, you had to have a math degree, not a math education degree. You know, some of those nuances of what degree would apply or be applicable. You should have the discretion or flexibility to make up that criteria at your level.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Angie, can I ask a question? This is Renee.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Renee.
For smaller schools, I know sometimes the allocation threshold, if you're a smaller school, ends up being, obviously a lot lower. We have 5 teachers on TSSP right now. Is there any indication for a smaller population school if it's going to be equivalent to that amount of money that would flow through to educators, or is that not defined yet?
It is not defined, but I think that is a great question that I would like to write down, because I anticipate just looking at all of you and how different you are from, say, a district that serves, K-12. I know some of you do serve K-12, but many of you serve either K-8 or, like Renee, you may only serve 9-12. And it could impact especially the high schools, charter high schools, maybe a little more. I would imagine a lot of the elementaries might receive more funding than they anticipated, because often your except for special education, many of your teachers are not quote unquote math teachers, computer science teachers. So I think this is going to be very interesting to see, for example, Renee, if you had 5 teachers, and let's say that was 5 times 5, let's say $25,000 that was coming to your school. But under the new allocation, I don't know if you can expect to get 15,000 or 50,000, right? I think it'll be very interesting to see. You might have some schools that receive less than they had teachers receiving those funds, and you might have more. And I could see that especially being the case with a K-8 charter school receiving more than teachers were receiving, but I can't say that for sure. So Renee, I don't know if Elise, you could put that question in, that document we have on notes and feedback related to the 2024 session. If you could put that question in there about what is there any consideration for LEAs? Specifically, I think high school charters are a very good example of this, where under the new formula, they might receive less. Is there a potential for us to do a distribution that might be the greater of some sort of allocation or what their teachers were receiving before? We may need to do some modeling of that funding, Renee. Honestly, we have not done that yet because it's such a new program. And I think what we're going to find is questions like the one you just presented will help us think through what some of the distribution impacts might be. And I think it'll be really good for us to model this so that we can have conversations with the legislature next session if we're noticing some big disparities. But I will say that because there is an expectation now, Renee, for the LEA to come up with 20%. Let's say that again, your current staff, those 5, that was 25,000. It might be that you're only going to receive 18 to 20,000, but that was anticipated because you're expected as a charter to come up with 20%. So just remember that as well. You might see a little bit of a shortage because there is an expectation that you also use some of your local funds to support those stipends. Okay, great. Well, any other feedback or questions? Because I did want to share with you that part of this presentation as well is an opportunity for us to hear concerns or questions you have for our staff or the board that you want us to address over the coming year. Carrie Ann.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to know, so every school, no matter what, gets some of this funding. There is not a zero.
That's correct.
Okay.
Every
that-
LEA. So I
Yes.
just want to clarify that because some of you might be directors of a school, or maybe all of you are at the LEA level, but I know that some charters have multiple campuses. But the funding would go to the LEA, right? And then it's right now it's not necessarily set as a set amount per school. I just wanted to clarify that. It's a set amount per LEA. And so you could have, if you are with a charter that has, say, 5 schools or 5 campuses, I don't think it necessarily means that you have to spend an equal amount at each of the 5 schools. Because you could imagine, especially thinking through, like if you were in a district, many of the current recipients of the TSSP might lean more heavily towards the secondary space in middle and high schools. And so it could be that they choose to only have one category area that's in the elementary space. Although I will say that one of the biggest, I've heard from our staff that one of the biggest shortages that we're experiencing as a state right now is in the elementary teacher area, including kindergarten and others. So it will hopefully be a good opportunity for you all who do work in the elementary space to receive some funding to support retention and recruitment of the elementary teachers as well. Hopefully I answered your question, Carrie Ann, but the more information will be coming as well.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. If there are no other questions on that, just stay tuned. Marie, you may want to invite USBE staff who are currently over TSSP. So I know that Malia Height, I believe Todd Call and Malia are going to work to provide some supports in this area, along with Erica Horsley and Kristen Campbell. So in a couple of months, you may want to invite them back to talk about what efforts are going on at USBE to get feedback in preparation for a rule that we will ultimately bring to the board probably this fall or early winter in preparation for that rollout.
Perfect. We'll plan on that. Thank you.
Okay. Excellence in Education and Leadership Supplement Program. This is the new $150,000 $150 million pilot program. Those $150 million are meant to be spent over, it's a 5-year pilot. The first 2 years of this pilot program will be preparation for launching it. The first year will be given to the Center for the School of the Future at Utah State University. They are going to be the administrators of this program, not USBE. This program is modeled after a similar program coming out of Texas. And in Texas, this program, their similar program is supported by the University of Texas at Austin. And that's why the legislature chose to have the Utah State University Center for the School of the Future to support this one. So they will be creating the benchmarks, the criteria for how to determine the high performing teachers. So let me step back a bit. I kind of moved forward too much. This program will be providing up to $20,000 stipends for teachers in the top 25% high performing teachers in the state. The top 5% are those that would be eligible for a $10,000 stipend. And if that teacher is teaching in a high poverty school, they would get double that amount. So that's where the 20,000 comes. But the standard stipend would be 10,000, or I believe the other two tiers are 5 and 2,000. So then it's like 10% to, or sorry, 15% to 5% gets the second tier, and then 15 to 25%. If you're in that 15 to 25% high performing, you get that lowest amount. And again, all of those teachers, if they're teaching in a high poverty school, their stipend will be doubled. The second year, so I mentioned that the first year is going to be for Utah State to prep. The second year is actually going to be an opportunity for all of you. So from 25-26 school year, you will be establishing the policies that you need to, because it'll be kind of in collaboration with the School of the Future to determine those high performing teachers. And then the first stipends will go out in fall of 26. So at the beginning of the 26-27 school year. Any questions about that? I think more detail will be coming over the coming year. If you're interested in engaging in conversations or providing feedback on this pilot program, I recommend you reach out to the Center for the School of the Future, and that might even be something, again, Marie, that you might want to invite the Center for the School of the Future to come back. So, not soon, but maybe in like 8 months or 10 months or something, to give a report on how things are going there. All right, next slide. And let's see how much time we've already been going for almost 45. I think I'll try to speed up a little bit and then let you ask me questions if I'm not going into enough detail. So SB 137 makes a number of changes. Primarily, I would say the biggest changes that you'll be interested in is it is making changes to the teacher evaluation requirements, including allowing now for you to do a summative evaluation up to once every 4 years instead of an annual summative evaluation. But you are expected to do a formative evaluation every year. And it will be up to you to determine if you want to do it once every 4 years. If you did want to continue to do it annually, you will have that flexibility. The State Board of Education, the Law and Licensing Committee looked at a rule on the updates to the teacher evaluation requirements that will be coming, and you can start using the new requirements now or wait or phase in sometime over the next 5 years. And some of those changes are just really focusing on growth-oriented evaluations and hopefully giving you more flexibility as well. So just Julie Lundell in our office is the person who will be the best person to reach out to with respect to teacher evaluations if you have questions. A lot of these, obviously, these requirements don't apply to you, meaning you're not required to do it. But I know many of you choose to use the teacher evaluation model that districts are required to use. And so I'm mostly giving you this information in case you are using the same model that the districts use. The other thing to note is that this bill did expand the allowable uses of funds for the paid professional hours. For example, it does allow you to distribute the funding on a reimbursement basis for certain like travel costs or costs related to attending a conference, which is a little different than I think than it has been in the past, where most LEAs are distributing the funding based on the number of hours, up to 32 hours. The other thing to note is that the code was amended to change the date for when the paid professional hours plans are to be submitted to your principals. And I just lost that date. It's either September 1 or September 15th. So previously those plans needed to be in place within that first week of the school year beginning, and now that has been pushed back. All right, next slide. HB, is this the one you were starting with, Elise? Or am I covering this one as well?
You're doing this one, but Ted has his hand up, so I
Oh,
just want
great. Ted, go ahead.
Angie,
Yeah.
who would we talk to at the state to get more details on the paid professional hours grant?
Katie Hill is the person.
Okay, thanks.
And then if it's a money thing though, meaning then it's Sam Uri. So I should have clarified. Katie Hill is the point person for like the plans or allowable uses or best practices related to teachers and how they use the hours. Sam Uri would be the right person to talk to if it's about money, the funding you're receiving, or any issues about how you distribute funds related to the hours or reimbursement.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right, the stipends for future educators program. This is HB 221. I think it's one that many people are very excited about. I'm sure many of you are former teachers and went through your own student teaching are also excited about it. It's going to give the opportunity for teachers to be compensated or receive a stipend while they're doing their student teaching. USBE will be determining the amount of the stipend based on the number of qualifying student teachers and the amount of funding available. We are going to enact a board rule on that. I believe a board rule may be coming in May to law and licensing. That's my recollection. If you have questions ongoing about this new program, Erica Horsley will be the one in our office who's going to be the administrator of getting the funding out. But just make sure, one of the things that's going to be very important for purposes of this program is that you are able to report how many student teachers you have working in your schools. The funding will be distributed to you to pay those student teachers. Ted, is that your hand up again? Go ahead.
No, sorry, I forgot to lower it.
Oh, okay, great. All right, the next slide that will be, I think I'm going to turn it over to you. Finally get a break from hearing from me only. So Elise, why don't you take it away?
Thank you. I'm using 3 screens, so I'm getting very agile. This slide is for HB 29. So this is the Sensitive Material Review Amendment. So if you remember about a year ago in the legislative session, Representative Ivory came out with the first draft of these sensitive materials. It went through some changes and feedback throughout the year. And so now the law clearly defines the objective sensitive materials versus subjective sensitive materials. And we actually just as a board went through the first draft, the first committee for rulemaking purposes for this law. It also establishes the review process. So it makes it clearer about somebody in the LEA doing that initial review for objective sensitive materials rather than having to take that to the review committee that you put together. So it does allow for several LEA employees to do that initial review. And then it also set a standard for the state that if materials are found to meet that objective sensitive materials standards in at least 3 districts or 2 school districts and 5 charter schools, I should say 5, I apologize, will need to be removed statewide. So once we find out that we've set up a plan through our rule of how that information is going to get to us as a state, and then once it's sent to us as a state, then we'll be able to notify each LEA about books that have met the threshold. If there's any questions on this one. Okay. I get all the big.
Elise, sorry, I
Yes.
have a question. Are those districts and charters identified publicly, or is that an anonymous complaint?
That is a great question. All the information that we get as a state has to be uploaded online and available for the public or put out into the Education Interim Committee report. But I don't know if the actual LEA name would be public. Angie, do you happen to know off the top of your head?
I don't. I'm trying to remember if we would. I think we are just required to state once it hits that that benchmark, but I don't know
Yeah,
if we're required to state the names.
It doesn't require that in the law, and we didn't put that in the rule, but that's a good thing to consider. I'm going to write that down in our notes.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, could you all see any pros or cons to providing the names of the districts or the charter schools?
Well, for me, it underscores sort of the political nature of this bill and where these complaints are coming from.
So maybe you're thinking that this is happening with the minority, a very small number of schools or school districts. Is that kind of what you're saying? Without-
Yeah, and in certain parts of the state, perhaps.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And if I might add, it also could be disproportionately represented by one of the charter schools that may have a larger population in those areas, even if it's a smaller school.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
Yeah, it just seems to give an inordinate amount of power to just a few few districts, and so this could be problematic, but thankfully it can be repealed. So
Yes. And I'm sure those districts would be happy to say they don't necessarily want to have that power. But you're right. It's a little, skewed in a sense, because we do know that it's a small handful of districts that are receiving the majority of the complaints.
There was a note in the chat from Tyler Bastian. Hi, Tyler. That it should be required that there should be full disclosure. So I really appreciate all that feedback. That's really great to take back to our board members as we write rules. That's helpful to think about. The next one is HB 261. This was the Equal Opportunity Initiatives. And the big part of this was the discriminatory practices that are prohibited in both higher education and K-12. So that's anything that is a policy, procedure, practice, program, office, initiative, or required training that is based on an individual's personal identity characteristics. So like race or age. Color, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, national origin, religion, or gender identity. And one of the questions that we got asked a lot is if things that have the word equity or the things that have diversity in a name need to be removed. And the answer that we got from legislators over and over again was that unless it was called, quote, diversity, equity, and inclusion, end quote, then it was okay. So then that's a decision to be made at the LEA level about how you want to follow that. And just generally, all processes should be neutral based on those personal identity characteristics and focused more on all students being successful and all students being supported rather than any particular group identity. So is there any questions on 261? Okay. Next comes the big one, the school safety amendments. So there was a lot in this one. It actually took us as a team at the state level 5 different meetings to break this down into all the different things we were required to do. So I'm going to hit on the big ones, but if you have specific questions, please ask or reach out at a later time. One of the biggest things that it does is the School Security Task Force Education Advisory Board is extended and changed some of the membership. So at the state level, there's really going to be a lot more participation, I guess, in school safety. It also establishes the state, I'm trying to look for my notes, what they call it, the state security chief. And a lot of the rules and the way that a lot of these programs and things that are in this law are going to be rolled out are up to him. And he has been appointed and he has started working and he works very well with the education community. So I'm very hopeful that this is going to go really well. One of the things that he is in charge of is ensuring that all schools have completed the safety needs assessment by December 31st, 2024. So that's going to be one on your to-do list. And to also designate a school safety and security director. For a lot of bigger schools, these need to be separate from positions that are already there, but some carve-outs were made for very small schools and charters. So if you'll need to look and see if maybe your program falls under that, if you have under a certain threshold of students. The school guardian program was put into place, and I know there were some questions about that one. Oops, using one of my 3 mice to look this up. 84. And so really what this does, it's not required, but there has to be somebody at the school at all times who is armed and prepared to protect the school in that way. And so if you already have an SRO who is assigned to your school, then you're covered. If you have a hired safety person, like a security guard or something, that could possibly also cover that requirement. But if not, then the option is there for the school guardian program. So I had a great question. What about when the SRO goes on vacation? So in another section of this law, you have to update your MOU, your agreement with your local police force that supplies your SRO. And that can be something that you put in there, that there is a backup. If not, there has to be somebody else to take that spot. And so if that's somebody that you hire, if you contract that out, or if you provide a school guardian. How many charters have a full-time SRO is the question. That's a great question. I do not know the answer to that.
Do any of you have one?
Yeah.
A full-time one?
Nathan Marshall has one.
Nathan, can you remind us what school you're with?
Yeah, I'm at Providence Hall. We have an SRO that covers the high school. We're K through 12 and our campuses are pretty much right next to each other. So we've had an SRO since like 2018.
It looks like New Ames has 2 full-time SROs, one at each campus. And then it looks like Carrie Ann says they share an SRO with the school district, and that bounces around between 4 or 5 schools. Hawthorne has one starting next year. So Beehive Tech, you don't have one.
Interesting. This is
Would,
really
would sharing an SRO be allowed?
Absolutely. You'd probably
It
just
would-
need to enter into an agreement with your local law enforcement agency and the other charters, you know, LEA that you'd like to do that. Is that kind of what you're thinking, is partnering with another
Well,
charter?
if this law allows for that, certainly, because I was talking with our police chief in Linden, and it'd be about $120,000 to hire our own. So.
Well,
look at
it's
ways-
allowable, but what I'm probably hearing from you, Ted, and I think that's you who's speaking, you would still need to have somebody there on campus in those times when the SRO is at the other school. So you're not required to have an SRO always be there, because there are the guardians, there's the armed security guard. But if your SRO was, say, at the other school, you would need to have a guardian or someone there when the SRO is away. Right, Elise?
Okay, that's okay. So from bell to bell is what the phrase he was using. So we would have to have someone on campus to respond to an emergency from bell to bell.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I'm looking it up just to make sure I'm getting the language correct, but that is correct. Tess, did
Just
you
to
have
be
another
clear-
question? Oh, sorry.
The grade levels. So this would include junior high and high school campuses, and then elementaries would have a different requirement, correct?
That is a great question.
I think elementaries have the same,
I thought
although
it
there
was the-
might. I think elementaries are required to have the person as well. There is an exception for small schools
Mhm.
where your guardian can be like the vice principal or the principal, but only if you have a very small school. Because the expectation is that this guardian or the person is separate from any of your teachers or your principal, vice principal. That's my recollection. But there is an exception if your school is smaller. And maybe that is something, Elise, we need to look at. Because I
the-
had a similar question come up. Go ahead, Elise, and I'll take a look at the bills.
Okay. It's just so long. It's hard to find anything you're looking for. One of the things too is that we have some rulemaking authority in this area. Actually, we have plenty of authority, but so does the school state security chief has the authority to make rules and on this program. And so we are going to have to work together and kind of see what rolls out from their office as well, as far as some of these little logistics as well. But
The safety assessment that you were referring to earlier, is that the same one we did earlier in the year? Or is this going to be a new assessment?
I do not know. I do know it has some updated things, so it may just be an updated version.
When will the updated version, is it already ready to be used?
No, I think that's one of the things that they're having to work on at his office.
This is Tess. I have my hand raised, and I know Elise, you called and offered a couple of notes on that, because I more questions came up as you were speaking. Really more for me about the business of timeline, like hearing Ted's question about the safety assessment, hearing from the state safety chief a couple of meetings ago. We learned that the assessment that we used this last year would still work, right, for this year. So it may not be outdated, but also there are all of these, like what qualifies as a small school for that exception. What happens when even your principal, that'd be me, has responsibility for students, and all of that. So just what do we know, if anything, about the timeline by which or through which small schools are going to, because we know we have to work with the state security chief, we have to work with a local county security person to try and figure out how we meet these expectations when there are so many complicated elements, that impact especially small schools like that, like ours, and charters. Like, we know we can't share an SRO. We still are going to have a guardian, probably. But I don't know how to identify who that person can be. And I just,
There are, yeah.
What I would say, Elise, I know we're at a little bit of a loss of words because it's starting to get into the areas of, well, not only is it our staff and people who know more about these programs than Elise and I do, but it's actually a lot of the work and the requirements and the authority is with that state security chief. So you'll, Marie, I know you guys aren't going to be the only ones. I'm sure the district leaders are going to also want to have an audience or be able to contact the state security chief. I would just state, Marie has a really great relationship with our school safety staff. And so, and we will pass this feedback along as well, that this is an area I'm guessing you may need your own 1 to 2 hour time slot on an upcoming charter directors meeting with the USBE school safety staff, and to invite the state security chief to come as well. So Elise and I aren't going to have all the answers. The good news is there are people in our office who know a lot more than Elise and I do. So don't feel like if Elise and I don't have the answers, that means that USBE is not going to be supporting you. We will. We have fabulous staff who are very much engaged, and even if it's as much as like getting you to the right connection in DP, the Department of Public Safety, or with the state security chief, we will be there to help. Our staff will be. Carrie Ann.
Thank you. So my school's safety committee had a meeting and we were reading through this, and our understanding is we didn't have to do anything until after doing the needs assessment. Is that accurate?
Anything, the needs assessment is really going to inform what you're going to receive or you're going to be able to be eligible for under the grant program, the 100 million. So when you say we are not required to do anything, I would say when it comes to school safety costs, that would be those one-time costs for like making changes to your building or buying certain security software. Yes, I would say when it comes to those things, you're right. There's probably no rush to try to figure out like capital building changes, etc. Now, with respect to having a school safety specialist, I believe you're required to have a school safety specialist by fall of this year. And then also, I believe the SRO and the Guardian, it's also starting this fall. But is that your understanding, Elise? I don't think they can wait till, because I think the readiness assessment is due in December of this year.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's really more about identifying what kind of items or grant you're going to be applying for.
So Okay, so I'm gonna have to cut a teacher to be able to afford an SRO. How do you like I guess I'm really concerned for my school specifically. We've got, teams in place, but this is a huge issue for us little guys.
Yes.
I'm just looking for, is there
Well,
what in the world are we supposed to be doing? Help us,
my
please.
recollection is that there is an exception for smaller schools to have like your vice principal or principal be this. We did raise this issue with Representative Wilcox, especially when it comes to, well, what if you have nobody in your school who wants to be a guardian or who wants to carry on campus? And that response we received is, well, when you're hiring people from now on, you'll make sure and hire somebody who'd be willing to carry. So that was kind of the response we got. I know that's not helpful, but it's hard because USBE didn't like ask for this, if you know what I mean. But we recognize it is a very high fiscal impact on all schools. Like our fiscal note that we were identifying was in the millions ongoing just to pay for like the SROs and the guardians. But we only received one-time funds. Mr. Seal.
I asked a couple times in chat and haven't heard.
Oh,
Any discussion on online schools? Because they cut us out of the funding for the school safety specialist and said we didn't qualify for funding, but we still had to required to do everything else. Does this now mean I need to hire somebody to sit in a house with a gun when there's no students around anywhere?
yeah, that's a good question. That might be something that the state board could exempt. I mean, do you have an office where students come in, say for testing, or you have students coming in and out, or really are students only offsite?
They come into testing when required to locations we rent for the day.
Okay.
But that's it.
I think that's a good, Elise, I'm going to let you keep going. I'm going to actually put that as one of the issues to be addressed.
Because
And
I
also
agree with the rest. That is, I don't have an assistant principal I could, have hire carry. So, this is a huge fiscal impact. And there's not enough turnaround for me to wait for somebody to be hired. Is willing to, that needs to be addressed as well. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm actually typing right now to the heads of our school safety team here at the USBE to get some answers and find out also what kind of information they're going to be putting out over the next few weeks, because I know that there's a lot of questions about this. So they wanted to get ahead of that. Trying to think.
Can I
So
ask-
I've asked them these questions. Yes, Ted.
Just baby step one. It sounds like it's just wait. Is that right? We just have to wait, or is there something that we can be doing? Like we're working on budgets for next year and staffing plans and all that in April. But is it just something I need to talk to our school board and say, hey, we're still waiting on information. We can't really do anything. Or is there something we can walk out of this meeting and do today?
Beyond the understanding that the safety assessment is changing and that it will need to be done by December, and just having a plan for that is probably the biggest one. Otherwise, there is just a lot of waiting until we know more from both the agencies that are working together on this one. Angie, what else would you say?
One of the things I was going to ask, I feel like my recollection was that the guardian could be a volunteer that gets a stipend. The guardians will they will receive some significant training. I feel like there were 3 big trainings in the first year, and that training will come from the law enforcement partners and DPS, not from USBE. So I say that because it might be that you could get a volunteer who serves as your guardian. The other thing you could consider is the armed security guards may be much cheaper than an SRO. Of course, an SRO is probably going to be the gold standard, right? but there may be ways of cutting costs or getting a person at a lower cost. And there is funding for the stipends for the guardians. Isn't that right? At least we did receive like is it $500? I feel like it's $500 per guardian. And part of that might have been to cover their time to attend the trainings, etc. But yeah, I would say wait until you can have an opportunity to meet with our school safety staff. And that might be something, Marie, that is either something you do in your May charter directors meeting, or even see if you could have something sooner, right? A
Yeah, we'll see if
standalone
we can
meeting.
get that as soon as possible.
And also invite that state security chief as well, too.
Yeah, I reached out to our staff on the project if they had any intel, and they said really it is all at the state security chief's office, and they are still in planning mode. But they are regularly going to send out information as they receive it from the state security chief. So as soon as anyone knows, you will know as well. And I'm sorry for so many unanswered questions. Malia, did you have a question as well? Or maybe some answers. Maybe you have answers for us.
Malia, I don't know if your audio isn't working, but we're not hearing anything from you. We just see your hand raised. All right, I'm guessing that either that hand. Oh,
Oh,
now
yes.
again. Well, we heard, can you hear me now? And that's all. Well,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Okay, sorry. I was switching monitors or mute buttons. Anyway, I attended a UPAC meeting with Royce and Tassel and the state security chief or their legislator was on the session. And the one thing that you have to do is identify a safety specialist immediately. And they're
Yes.
working on the rest is what they said.
I think that's good advice. The first thing you should do is identify the school safety specialist. And that one is the one where I believe there are limitations on who can serve as a school safety specialist unless you're of a certain size. And I think it is if you serve less than 1,000 students.
It was 350.
I had some notes on this one. Let me see. Anyway, I had reviewed this bill more in detail when I met with HR directors. And so I had that fresh in my mind, and now I'm having a hard time finding that. But it could be that you as a principal or a vice principal could be the school safety specialist. But in many larger schools, that is not, it can't be a teacher. It can't be the principal. It can't be the vice principal. It needs to be somebody like, I guess it could be a facilities person.
Yeah. My favorite is Tyler's plan to just use a really mean llama. That's my favorite so far. I'm going to suggest that in our rule. Let's see. And Tess, I do believe that you're correct. That you still need to have two different folks serve as the role of school safety specialist and school safety director. And one of those people could also be a guardian. So you can kind of double up that way, but yeah. Stay tuned for more information. This one is gonna roll out. And I think also understanding that we had conversations with the legislature and, who are part of this and said, this is gonna be a really heavy lift for everybody. This is going to be really hard, especially with implementation timeline. And there was understanding that there was recognition that it is a really heavy lift. So I'm hoping that there will be some grace and some understanding from all parties involved as we move forward on this really big bill. So, but please feel free to keep adding questions, and I'm going to add them to our document, and I can send out emails as soon as I know more. Let's see, other bills related to school safety. There was HB 119 with the school employee firearm possession amendments. Also 418, the school offender reintegration amendments, and 14, the school threat penalty amendments. I'm just going to start at the bottom. So for school threat penalty amendments, if you remember in many of your policies, you have to describe when a student must be suspended or expelled for certain behaviors. And then there's other areas of your policy where they may be. This just adds the school threat if there is a known threat or a known hoax, right? So if a student knowingly advertises that there is a school threat when they know that there is not one, then they must be suspended or expelled for a false emergency report. HB 418 prohibits a student who has committed a violent or sexual crime against a student or employee from attending the same school as that victim when they come back, if they need to leave, or if they've been suspended, or if they are involved in JJS, then when they come back, they can no longer be a part. And then that person may also bring a cause of action against a parent or guardian with legal custody of the minor to recover the costs and damages caused by the offense. So there's some details in there if that affects any of your students. And then HB 119, the Educator Protector Program, incentivizes a teacher to responsibly secure or carry a firearm on the grounds of the school where the teacher is employed. After receiving training, including a concealed carry permit, the teacher may store their firearm in a biometric gun safe and provides that the educator is not subject to civil liability. The LEA may not prohibit an educator from participating in this program. So while this is very, very optional, you as an LEA cannot prohibit a teacher from doing this if that is their choice and they have met all the requirements. Angie, was there anything else on that one or any of these? Okay. And then HB 362 is the juvenile justice revisions. So every year we've got juvenile justice revisions bill. This one updated a few things. It requires LEAs to report when students commit offenses on school grounds or at a school sponsored event. So even if it's not during the school day, if it's happening on the grounds of the school or at an event sponsored by the school. And then principals are required to notify law enforcement if the offense is referable. It also requires schools to notify appropriate parties when an offending student has a reintegration plan at the school. And again, this had a coordination clause with that last one we talked about, where it prohibits reintegration where there are protective orders against a student or a crime was a sexually related crime. And so it just updates some of those requirements for those reintegration plans. One of the big things that was in this bill was the definition of habitual truant. So if you remember, like 6 or 7 years ago, there was big juvenile justice reform, and part of that was removing truancy as one of the big reasons why students were ending up in the juvenile justice system. And so, but accidentally throughout that process last year, the habitual truant definition was removed from the law. And so just as a way of providing more structure and more certainty for you all as LEAs, that habitual truant definition was put back into the law and does allow you as an LEA to refer a student to the court system for truancy, but only if they have been found to be habitually truant twice during the same year and there was an evidence-based alternative intervention or prevention program. So if you've tried everything you can, it happened more than once, it's now twice, then you can refer a student to the court systems for truancy. Okay. Angie, was this yours? Okay.
Yep. So the next bill that we'll be discussing is HB 182. This one is about the student survey amendments. And this one did a couple of things. For example, it does require you to get consent at the beginning of the school year. If you're going to conduct or request information or survey students regarding something related to an early warning system, social emotional learning survey questions, and the school climate survey when they register for school. So let me unpack that a little bit. All of you, again, are going to be required to have an early warning system now due to HB 84. Again, the state will have a system that you could opt into and use. And if you do that, the state will pay half of the costs and you would pay half of the cost, or you could have your own. So if you plan to use as part of your early warning system, ask questions of students in order to support that early warning system, you would need to get consent at the beginning of the school year during the registration process, as well as social emotional learning survey questions. One of the questions we had specifically from our student data privacy staff, but I would say it's from USBE staff in general, is whether you all think it would be helpful if USBE were to ask our board to define social emotional learning survey questions, or if it would be best to leave that term undefined, because right now it's not defined in code. It's not defined in board rule for purposes of this bill, the survey bill. One of the pieces of feedback we wanted to receive from you is if you felt like it would be valuable or helpful to you all if the state board defined that at the state level, or if you'd prefer that that be done at the local level. Does anyone have any feedback on that we could share to help inform whether we make recommendations for our board to define that?
Real quick, I think that defining on a local level is going to be way better. I don't think it makes me nervous the way they've defined a lot of things, to have them define it and then have us then have to adjust to their definition.
Good feedback. And that's what we were wondering. Oftentimes, many LEAs will tell us they prefer to define things at the local level and not have the board do that at the state level. Is there anyone who disagrees and feels like they'd much rather have quote unquote cover from the state or more clarity from the state? Or if so, let us know. Otherwise, we'll take Tyler's feedback as something we can share.
Angie,
Yeah,
I agree. State board does not need to make that definition. That could only screw it up.
okay, good to know. Helpful. Speaking as a board member yourself, you know how those are hard definitions to enact, but it's even harder if you want flexibility among different types of communities, right? Because you may have some communities that the definition wouldn't work for and others that it does. So, all right, that was a piece of feedback we were looking for. Thank you. The other thing to note is that when students transfer, you have to get your own consent to be able to administer surveys from that student. You can't rely on the consent that they may have received from their previous district or charter school that came before you. So just know that when students enroll mid-year, you'll need to get consent as well. Also, just a reminder, students may not be punished or rewarded for participating in a survey. You are required to provide copies of all surveys you give to parents so that they can review them. And then the last one is that LEAs are no longer required to administer the school climate survey, and you aren't required to use the USBE model climate survey. But if you do use the USBE model climate survey, we will continue to support that at the state level, with links or to be able to administer that. So, all right, any questions about HB 182?
We had this question in our data meeting as well, when this goes into effect and whether getting the permission is actually at the time of registration in the spring. Like, does it need to be now, or is it at the beginning of the school year?
I would say it's in that enrollment process that you do when, I don't know about you, I'll just talk about the school where my kids attend. It's usually like either late July or early August where we're required to go into, in my case, it's Skyward, and you go through this whole process and you update like contact information, who can pick up the kids. There's a bunch of policies that you have to say you read. I think that is when you do it, not in the spring when they're selecting classes, for example, or when they're doing their intent to enroll. Like, I know a lot of people right now are asking their communities about whether students are going to be enrolling for kindergarten. That's not the official registration and enrollment process. At least my understanding is and that's more of an intent to say, yes, we intend to enroll in your school, but that the official registration and enrollment usually happens in like August. But I don't know that it says you have to do it one way or the other. I will just say that my experience with the school that my kids go to is what is often happens in the spring is more of an intent to continue and an intent to select certain classes. But the real registration and enrollment happens more like early August or late July. So, but we can ask that. I don't think the bill does not give a timeline. So I think it would really be up to you to make that determination of when the enrollment and registration process makes sense for you.
There was also
Yeah, and charter.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
There was also the question about whether the copies of the survey questions needed to be upfront or upon request.
I don't think it stated that it has to be posted publicly, which that would be the proactively or, I do think it's just upon request, but I need to look at the bill again. It's a great question. Let me look at that real quick.
On line 165, it says that for the survey, the LEA shall ensure that the written notice described above should include the survey the LEA will administer to the parent student.
So there are surveys you have to get, permission from the parents at the time of enrollment. Those surveys, so that's the 3 that we mentioned on the last slide. It sounds like for those, you would be required to have links to the surveys at the same time, or links to the survey questions at the time of enrollment. But for other surveys, you may decide to administer later on in the year that don't fall into those 3 categories. It probably could be upon request. And it would probably be at the time that you're seeking students to opt in. Remember now, everything is it's opt. You have to give notice and they opt in, right? They can't, it's not opt out. It's not assumed that it's a yes unless you opt out. It's more of a proactive, do you opt in or out? Like, are you okay with the students receiving this survey or not? And so I would say you'd probably need to do that at the time that you're asking the parents permission to administer the survey. That's when you would provide a copy. And it does look like the ones at the beginning of the year, they do require that to be proactively provided. The notice needs to include the survey, the actual survey questions. Thanks, Elise. Okay, and there was one other thing. No, I think everything's done with HB 182 unless anybody has a question. This bill is in effect this fall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So July 1 or May 1. But you don't need to worry about doing it for like your May of your school year. It's just beginning this next fall. Does this apply to the survey that is associated with such things as ACT testing? Yes, I would imagine it does. So you would need to get the parents permission before they could take that survey as well. The other thing that you're required to share at the time of registration or whenever you're requesting permission is you need to let them know the types of persons or government entities that you will be sharing the data with. Sorry, I'm just the student level data. So you would only need to share who will be who you will be sharing student level, meaning identifiable information with. So if there is an entity that you regularly share the information with, for example, a researcher, who's working on a project with you or a program, you would need to make sure that you state that you are sharing student identifiable or student level data with those entities. Okay. All right, next one, HB 301, charter school accountability amendments. And Marie and Paul, if you're here, feel free to supplement, add, because you probably worked more closely on this bill than I did. But this bill in general does a couple of big things. First, now the state board will be appointing only one member instead of two. The state charter school board will be adding 2 members with innovation, or I'm trying to remember sorry, I'm just trying to find my notes from another area. With experience in innovation, and I apologize, but the State Board of Education is going from appointing 2 members to 1. It also clarifies in a lot of ways the fact that USBE has oversight and monitoring over general programs and your compliance or non-compliance with requirements that would apply to both charter school and school districts, and that your authorizer is primarily has monitoring and oversight over the charter agreement, and makes that separation more clear. It also provides an opportunity for charter schools to request a review of evidence of non-compliance with that authorizer before the authorizer takes actions like removing the charter director or replacing, getting a new finance director, for example. So there are some new, I don't know if I'd call it due process requirements, but it does give the charter school more opportunities to have the authorizer review and consider whether the charter school has come into compliance, as well as determine whether additional time is needed to allow the charter school to come into compliance with the elements of the agreement. The other thing that this bill does is, you may remember there's something called the Voluntary School Improvement program, where a charter school, instead of closing, that charter school could be taken over by a high-performing charter school. Now that list of who could take over the charter school is broader, and it does include, I was just going to find the list, but it does include another charter school as well as a third party could take over a charter school. And then let's see some other things. Performance measures are a little different in the sense that it sounds, the bill talks about taking into account the specific needs of the mission of the charter school when determining whether you're in compliance with performance measures. And I think that's it. Let me see if I missed anything. And Marie or Paul or anyone else, if there is something you would like to add, I welcome that.
I think that was a very good quick overview, but if there's any specific questions, we can speak to that as well.
Okay, great. HB 43, it does require charitable organizations that could include you as a nonprofit, that you have to file an unredacted copy of your most recent IRS form 990, 990EZ, 990N, or 990PF. Hopefully that makes sense to all of you. I am unfamiliar with those forms, but it does have a new reporting requirement with that form. Okay, let's go to the next one. I'll try it. So let me just do a little quick time check, in because we have, I believe, Marie, we have till 2:30, right? So should we
Yes,
just keep,
that's so far.
maybe start speeding up our speed a little bit so we can get through more? I think we only have, there's only about 8 to 10 slides, and the rest of these, let's try and get through them. I'll try and get through them quickly. And I know I'm speaking to myself because Maria's like, yeah, Angie, that's you that needs to speed up. So I will speed up, but I do want to give time for questions. Okay, HB 82, this one has a lot in it. It's got about 10 different things in it. It was a bill that the state board had 7 policy requests. We took it to the Education Interim Committee and they combined them into this bill and then added some of their own things. Tess, sorry, I saw your hand raised. Did you want to ask something before I get into HB 82?
Yeah, just a quick one on that last one, a couple of questions in the chat. To whom are we submitting the unredacted 990? We have
Okay.
the IRS, we have to file it now somewhere with the state? I can't find details on that.
Yeah, let's see. Application on foreign, it's on lines 1256 through 1258 in HB 43. It says, okay, that's a foreign nonprofit. You know what? I wonder if that we misread that.
Line
Now I'm reading.
742.
Thank you.
Maybe.
I was looking at the wrong one, I think.
And I'm happy to get someone to get back to us on that if we want to keep moving.
Yes.
I couldn't find that answer.
It's the division. Elise, could you look and see how division is defined in Title 13, Chapter 22? Because they're filing it with the division, and I'm just not sure what division that is. And my guess is it could be the tax commission, but I'm not sure. So Elise will take a look at that while I go through HB 82.
Thank you.
So this bill, now, if you remember, for charter land trust plans, previously your authorizer needed to approve those plans. That's been amended. And so now it'll be approved by your board. And then it's also approved by your budget officer as well, in lieu of the charter authorizer. The ethnic studies curriculum deadline has been extended for till the end of 2025. If you may remember that there was a requirement that by August 1 of 2024, that all LEAs were to update your instructional materials to comply with ethnic studies standards that the board was going to set. And so that deadline has been extended. School fees, we'll talk about this more a little bit with HB 415, but it now separates funds that you raise through fundraising are not now school fees. So you wouldn't have to notice those or have a public comment period on your fundraising. The school fees rule, we anticipate coming to committee in May. And we will also be creating a separate rule on fundraising. So as well as updating our 277113, which is the general rule on financial reports and compliance. If you're interested in school fees, I highly recommend that you tune into, my guess is it'll go to the finance committee, but it could go to law and licensing as well. That will be up to our board leadership to determine where those 3 rules will go. But we will be talking about the school fees rules starting in May. And this also allows you to have your parent seminars. And I don't know if you all are required to have them. I think only school districts are required to hold those. So I'm just going to pass on that one. You may remember last year a bill, HB 348, passed that allows students to refrain from any aspect of education. This bill now requires annual notice to parents of that constitutional protection, along with another annual notice that you're already doing. Next slide. There's some additional reporting requirements on student attendance as well as discipline, suspensions, and expulsions. Primarily the one that's going to be new, but may not impact you very much because many of you don't have buses. But one of the new reporting requirements is about any discipline or incidents that occur at a bus stop or on a bus. Beginning October 1 of this year, all LEAs are required to provide the work email address of all school personnel. That would include part-time personnel that have an email address with your charter school, and you will submit those. We anticipate needing a board rule on this. I didn't think we would when this requirement first came, but as we've been discussing, we've been getting questions from people about different aspects of the email address and how they can be used. we are going to propose bringing a board rule to the board to kind of flesh this out, but just be prepared, or just know that you will be required to submit the work email addresses of all your personnel, not just educators or principals and administrators, but like anyone who works in your charter, for your charter. Is there a question? I see, I hear something.
I don't know if
from
it's still yours or if these were yours. I don't know, but I was looking through this the other day and I went,
Oh, was that not a question? Okay, we'll keep moving. Everywhere that youth in custody is stated in the code was changed to youth in care. And then last, our student data protection. We have 3 advisory groups. Those are going to be combined into one. Okay, next, HB 331, school and classroom amendments. This bill requires kindergartners to be potty trained before they begin kindergarten. And it will require you to establish a policy at your level on accommodations for students who might not be potty trained, whether that's an accommodation because they have a 504 accommodation or qualify for a 504 accommodation or an IEP. It also requires at the local level for you to consider parents supporting students while they're transitioning to becoming fully potty trained. And so look forward to creating that policy. The good news is our staff is going to have some samples, or it's going to provide support as well if you want that. HB 517, half-day kindergarten amendments. This one requires that if you receive a request from 18 or more students at the same school site to have a half-day option or half-day kindergarten, that you do have to have a standalone half-day class. It is interesting to think about how this applies to charter schools where you all are choice schools and you have caps on the number of students that you can serve. I would say that I believe that if you have a, what do you call it, a wait list, that you could provide preference to students who want to participate full day. If you are a full day, you don't have, as a reminder, you don't have to provide a full day option. You can continue to provide only half-day classes if you'd like. But if you do, as you know, have full-day classes, you are required to allow students and families to participate only in half-day. And the state board is going to be creating minimum standards on what that half-day option needs to cover or look like. And we do anticipate that rule coming to either maybe standards and assessment or law and licensing in May. SB 220, the only thing, if you are currently participating in the school readiness grant program, that's the preschool program, the PEEP, the preschool entry and exit profile, will be changing to include growth. And that will take a couple of years before that new assessment comes. Next slide. I believe this is you, right, Elise? Or would you like me to cover it?
Sure thing. Actually, could you do this one?
Yep, happy
prepped
to.
for the next two.
So HB 121 states that you cannot charge fees, may not charge an individual background check fee for a substitute teacher, a contract employee, a volunteer, or a non-licensed employee. So essentially, no more charging fees for those background checks. Also, the other thing is you need to provide an opportunity for individuals to clone their background checks from other LEAs. And this actually could be very helpful for you if you have somebody who regularly substitute teaches at a district or another charter school who's already conducted a background check. There is a process called cloning where you can get access to that so they don't have to do another background check. If you have questions on that, contact Malia Height in our office and she can help you with that. Next, HB 192 does require beginning July 1, 2025 for all LEAs, including charters, to develop leave policies that provide for parental leave that's similar to what the state has, which is 3 weeks parental leave and an additional 3 weeks of postpartum leave. So if the person is actually birthing the child, they would get 6 weeks, whereas another parent who isn't, so it could be a father or it could be an adoptive parent or a foster parent, would be entitled to 3 weeks of parental leave. Also, you need to, or you may, this is voluntary, this is not required. You may establish a policy for leave sharing. And that would be like somebody could give up their leave that they've accrued or entitled to give to another person. If you have questions about shared leave policies, DHRM has some examples. Our office also has a leave sharing policy. And DHRM has a really great resource book on this parental leave. USBE hasn't had access to that parent leave. This will be the first year, 24-25 will be the first year that USBE is also able to have that parental leave. But if DHRM has a lot of their resources available online to everyone. So if you wanted to look at their examples, Michelle Watts in our office is a great person to contact. She actually is a dual employee. She works for DHRM. And when I use the acronym, you're probably like, what is DHRM? It's Department of Human Resource Management that supports state agencies. So she would be a great resource if you have questions. HB 60 extends the phased retirement option for if you have any employees who participated in phased retirement. That was a pilot program, but now it is eligible or available permanently. HB 208, that bill makes some changes to the pedagogical performance assessment. So for example, it states that the State Board of Education may not require the PPAP or other assessment as a condition for licensure. There is a rule that's moving forward right now. Actually, it was reviewed by the Law and Licensing Committee last week that does give some more detail on those new licensing requirements. But you will, if you choose not to, and when I say you, it would be higher education entities and then any Apple programs or local LEA licensing educator prep programs. If in lieu of a PPAP, you do need to observe or evaluate. And when I say evaluate, I don't mean an instrument evaluation, but like visually assessing or some sort of an assessment of the competencies that your prep program, a person who's going through the prep program can demonstrate they've got those competencies. Any questions so far on any of those? Oh, Elise, it looks like the filing, and you probably saw this, but the division is the Division of Consumer Protection at the Department of Commerce. That is where you would file that form, that new form. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Okay, I can do this one. So HB 251 just opens up some additional options for people who are teachers or police officers who are state employees to return to work after retirement without forfeiting their retirement benefits. So if you've got anyone who's interested in that, I would talk to HR because that's very specific. HB 396 as well as HB 460 are similar to the Students' Right to Refrain law, but for your employees. So prohibits an employee from compelling an employer from compelling an employee to communicate or otherwise act in a manner that the employee believes would burden or offend the employee's sincerely held religious beliefs. And so you need to provide a process for accommodating that sincerely held belief. And then 411 is just that you cannot drug test your employees unless you have a policy laid out for that already, a written policy that you have shared with your employees and your prospective employees ahead of time. So if there's any questions on those ones. The next one is HB 4. Oh, that's a great question. How does HB 460 or 396 impact pronoun use? Angie, have you thought about that one? I have not.
I have not either. It's more about not engaging in an aspect of employment. So I guess it sounds like you're implicitly saying is, could an employee mandate or require people within the agency to use a different pronoun, and or whether the other employees use that pronoun? It might be helpful to get a little bit more background.
Yeah, my question specifically would be, what if a teacher or faculty member says, I will not use the pronoun preferred by a student.
By students, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't thought through that.
Because that, yeah, that's a question that is going to come up, and we would love a USB answer that isn't a punt on that. And I know that's tough.
Yeah, it's tough because, as you probably know, USBE can't serve as your legal counsel. And in these areas too, it gets really dicey too when there's federal versus state. And so it may not be very clear unless and until somebody gets sued, right? Because there might be some federal requirements that would trump some of these HB 396 and HB 460 issues, depending on the issue.
Yeah, that
Right. Because if somebody were to say, I'm going to say racial slurs, and just be really offensive and discriminate against people because that's my right of conscience. Do you see where I'm getting at?
Yeah.
Well, federal law wouldn't allow you to discriminate, but yet you've got this conflict. And so it's going to get, some of these issues are going to be very fact-based and very individual-based, and hard for USBE or almost anyone to just say blanket, here's some overarching guidance. I know that very much sounds like a punt, but I do think that it's very difficult to deal with these types of very nuanced issues in very broad terms. You almost have to take an individual employee or an individual student case and then address it. I don't know, Elise, anything you would add, but I am going to share that feedback that you would like, if possible, some guidance in this area. I'll just state that in the past, when we have worked on potential guidance related to some issues in this arena, our board has ultimately opted not to take it on. And in some ways, let me just share with you where that came from. It actually came from the request of attorneys who represent school districts and charter schools that said, don't do this. We want to handle it at our local level. And I know you're probably saying, well, that's great for them because they have in-house counsel, right? And I know you're probably feeling like you don't want that flexibility, but that I just wanted to share with you that perspective of some LEAs don't want USBE to take positions or clarify it because they feel like it actually hinders their ability to address student and educator specific needs on a case-by-case basis. But I will share the feedback nonetheless and see what we can do.
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
But it does sound like that's likely implicated here, that someone could make a claim of, that's my right of conscience, my religious belief, and I will not use pronouns that do not match someone's birth sex.
Potentially. And I guess I wonder, I'm just trying to brainstorm what I would do if I were in your shoes. And I would just say, anytime that person, instead of saying he or she, just use the person's name.
Yeah.
Angie is going to Angie's house, or Angie is going to work on Angie's work. You just replace the he, she, him, her, whatever, with that person's name every time, which is really awkward, but it might be a way to get around that.
Yeah. Okay, rereading the code to see if there's anything in there that we missed. But yeah, that's a tricky one. Moving on to HB 431, teacher retention. So this from Perucci creates the mentoring and supporting teacher excellence and refinement program. So this is a 2-year pilot program that's to provide funding to LEAs to improve the retention of strong educators who want to stay in the classroom but continue to grow. So it's really based on like leadership skills, and it's outside of the regular steps and lanes payment schedules. It also, beginning July 1st, 2025, requires an LEA to provide postpartum recovery leave in the amount that is at least equivalent to what is available to state employees. So if there's any questions on on that one. SB 44 is the Alternative Education Scholarship Combination. So in the past few years, students with IEPs have been able to use one of two different kinds of scholarship programs in order to pay for services. They're now combining those two. If a student has a current scholarship program or a current scholarship, they can continue using that until they age out. And so it doesn't change anyone who is currently in one of these programs. But going forward, it will all kind of fold into the Carson Smith scholarship program. And then SB 64, Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools Incentive Program. The biggest change to this pre-existing program is just that the USBE, so our agency now has to send out notices to teachers who would qualify for this program. So there's really not a whole lot of change at the LEA level. If there's any questions on that one? Slide 29.
So quickly, I'll go through these. HB1, that bill, the reason why it's on this list is because it does require the State Board of Education to establish a uniform amount for purposes of the amount of funding we'll be distributing to participating LEAs for the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Program. The first draft of that rule did go to the Law and Licensing Committee last week. It will go to the full board in May. You may want to take a look at the backup there's some modeling that was done. And in fact, if I have time, I will pull that and drop it into the chat. Right now, that uniform amount is estimated to be around $74,000 per educator. The version that the Law and Licensing Committee chose would distribute the lesser of the uniform amount or the amount that the amount of salary plus benefits cost for the actual educator. There's a different version that would distribute the uniform amount to per educator, regardless of whether the costs are lower. If you have specific questions about that, if we have more time, I'd be happy to answer more questions, but I will find that model for you because it does list the existing schools that are participating and how much the uniform amount will provide per participating school. HB3 appropriations adjustment, the reason why we put that one on here is it does require LEAs to submit your October 1 data a little earlier than normal. So now it's going to be the first Wednesday of October will be the deadline. And for 2024, that deadline is October 2nd. So it is going to be a little earlier this year and in future years. I think before it used to be October 7th was the standard, and now it's the first Wednesday in October will be the date. HB 105, that's increased funding per elementary schools for supplies money. HB 244 is really about requirements that you have to go through if you're being audited by the Ledge Auditor's Office. So hopefully not a lot of you are being audited by Ledge Auditor's Office, but if you are, you'll want to look at HB 244 for the requirements. So HB 415, this is the school fees law that passed that beginning with the fiscal year 25-26 will prohibit you from charging certain fees. And so in addition to any general fees, so originally this bill at one point would have just outlawed, so to speak, eliminated any general fees like a registration fee or a locker fee or just general fees. Now, beginning with the 25-26 school year, you may not charge a secondary student a fee for curricular or co-curricular activity that is required for the instruction of established course standards. So this is going to be something we're gonna have to work on over the next year because that came quite late in the session. Before, it just stated that you could charge for a curricular course or activity if it met certain criteria, like it was an instructional equipment or supply, a driver education course, a music instrument, school activity clothing, etc. But then kind of the last week of the session, this new language that is required for instruction of established course standards threw a little bit of a wrench into everything in the sense that what is required for graduation, for example, or required for middle school course requirements could be an elective for somebody else. So we're going to be working on this over the next year. And I know that Representative Strong and Senator Milner have committed to providing more clarity around what will be allowable versus not. And two things that are very clear is that you will be able to charge fees for the outside of the regular school day portion of the co-curricular activity or any extracurricular activity costs. Also, they did add for the textbooks. You may remember that textbooks you're not allowed to charge for anymore, except for if it's AP or concurrent enrollment. They did add IB textbooks. So if you have an IB program, just know that you'll now be able to charge fees for textbooks related to IB programming. With respect to the distribution of funds, I mentioned earlier $36 million of one-time funding. We're anticipating proposing in the board rule that, of course, the board may change, but that we distribute 50% of that 36 million on July 1, 2025. We'll just do it in a lump sum. And then 30% of that 36 million on July 1, 2026. And then the remaining 20% on July 1, 2027, with the idea that those funds you'll use to kind of pay down fees for 3 years to give you time to increase your budgets or reallocate your budgets to support the school fees. Any other questions about school fees? Okay. And just so you know, we'll know more after the board rules are finalized, probably in June. So I think we are at time. We didn't get through the last slides. Marie, you could share the slides with everyone. There are more. Do you want us to just cut off and I'll just do this little final thoughts before, or did you want us to keep going?
We can do like 10 more minutes.
Okay, we can quickly go. Let's try and get through all the slides as quickly as we can, Elise, and then have 5 minutes for questions.
Okay. So I'll zoom through these ones really quickly. SB 86, this has to do with local political subdivisions issuing bonds. So I don't think that impacts too many of you. HB 347, each LEA and public school is required by the 1st of July, 2025. An environment to all educators, school staff, and students that does not pose a predictable threat of serious bodily injury. So this just means that you have to take into account the safety of all students in a classroom. One of the examples that came up a lot was students with IEPs, but it is not specific to students with disabilities. It's just making sure that all students have access to a classroom that is free from disruptions or patterns of disruptions that substantially interfere. So that's the official language, is substantially and materially interferes. HB 534 is the Instructional Materials Review Commission was repealed. We actually just sent this rule through this last week. And so it just takes that out and puts all of the review process at the USBE and their groups. So student support bills. So SB 92 just states that there needs to be a policy and procedure to ensure that students who don't have cell phones or don't have electronic devices can still do all the same things that the other students can. One of the examples that was brought up a lot was access to football games. For example, you can't just use an app or Venmo for something, that there has to be an alternative. SB 159 creates a pilot program called Teaching Self-Government Skills for Success, Classroom Communication and Discipline Framework. If that's something that you're interested in, there's a lot of language. I would love to help you out with that one and walk you through that, but it's a pilot program if you are interested as an LEA to implement that. And there's some funds available for that as well. SB 164 allows a school, so this is not mandatory, but allows a school to apply and create a family outreach program. So create some kind of rules and guidelines around that. But again, it's optional. And then SB 205, the child sexual abuse prevention. So this increased the funds that's currently available for that child sexual abuse prevention programs that already exist, but increases the amount of required training. So it now states that every other year, kids in Utah schools shall get access to this prevention program. And the bill worked with various outside groups so that there can be contracted individuals to come in and do those trainings, and those trainings have been approved by the board. And then SB 246, this was another juvenile justice bill, but this one was just specific to the timeline that when students enter into the JJS system and they come back or they're involved in that process at all, there are notices that the courts send out to schools to inform them of where those kids are at and what's going on. This rule or this law states that you need to hold on to those notices for a year. And that just allows that if that student moves to another LEA, that you can have that information available to that new LEA, if that makes sense. So just to increase transparency, but because this is, super confidential information, there's going to need to be some things in place for that to happen. So it does not go into effect until July 1st, 2025. And then HB 413, the student mental health screener, is available to schools. This just changed the existing program that it is assuming that schools are opting in unless they are told otherwise. And so that's just for the student mental health screener. Real fast.
Great. All right. And I'm just putting in the modeling for the BTS Arts program uniform amount. That's what that link is above if you're interested, if you're participating. Okay, the next slide just quickly is HB 529. I wanted to share very quickly that previous to HB 529 passing, a student could participate in the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program part-time and be enrolled in a charter school or district part-time, essentially almost like dual enrollment. HB 529 prohibits now students from obtaining a scholarship and also enrolling in the school. What that means for you is if you would like to become a program provider, you can. So districts and charter schools can become a program provider just the same way that anybody else would become a program provider, like even a private school, like let's say Juan Diego will be a program provider for purposes of the Utah Fits All Scholarship. If you would like to become a program provider because you have people in your community who want to take a certain course, or they want to participate on the football team, or they want to participate on your debate team, you can set up a charge for that, because now you may remember that right now, if a student is a private school student, charter school student, they can participate in anything actually at their local district, their boundary area district school. That will no longer be the case. If they are a private school student and they are participating in Utah Fits All, they don't have the same rights to just enroll in their local district school, or rights to enroll in a charter school to participate in any of those programs. The good news is you can then set your own fees. Those would not be subject to this fee waiver or subject to school fees laws. That would be a totally separate program. ACE is the program provider that we contract with. They're really fabulous to work with. We've really enjoyed our experience with them. They are developing some guidelines and resources for charter schools and districts. If you would like to become a program provider, I know I think I saw the list. There are a couple of charter schools that have already been approved as program providers. If you're interested in that, I recommend that you contact ACE Scholarship, and they should have that information posted on their website. And yes, I will do that as soon as I can. I'll put a link to the information on our website. When you go to Utah Fits All, it does list the information for ACE on our website as well, but I'll try and find that for you and put a link in there. Also, sometime this week, Ryan Bartlett from our office, if you guys receive emails for the LEA heads email list, we are going to be sending out information that ACE is producing. We'll be sending that in an email. I believe that will happen this week. The other thing, AHB 247, the only thing I would add there is that there should be some increased communication between charters, and if you have students who are participating in SOEP, there should be some better communication going on between those SOEP providers. And also, if you have a lot of students participating in the SOEP program, just know that you will have to approve the students' enrollment in the SOEP course within, I want to say within 3 days. So if you have a lot of students in your school that participate in SOEP, you'll want to take a look at that. I think we only have 2 more slides, 3 more, but we've kind of run out of time. So are there any bills we did not cover that you wanted us to cover? Or questions you have in general? Okay, Tess is asking, public charter school students are able to participate in, yes, district, after school program, sports, or does this mean that charter school? No, it's only Utah Fits All scholarship students. So everything related to your students, if they want to participate in their district, like on the football team or the choir or band or whatever, all of the same laws about them, their ability to do that. Like if you don't have the course or you don't have the program, that's still, nothing there has changed. It's only if a student receiving a Utah Fits All scholarship wanted to enroll in a charter school or district program or course. Any other questions? If not, I will find the link to the ACE Scholar. Oh, that last slide, will you show that, Elise? We do have the bill book. It is available on our website now. Those are tiny URLs. You could click on those. I don't know if you can because it's, but what I can do, or Marie can do, is we can put links to that bill book. It is on our website now. If you go to our homepage, click on legislative session, you will see the 2024 pub. Will you click on that, Elise, so they can see what it looks like? And that's probably just the actual document. But even if you go to the USBE main homepage, there's a scrolling banner. If you click on legislative session, you'll be able to find it. So, Marie, any other questions or last things we can do?
This was wonderful. Thank you so much for all of the great updates. We always appreciate your time spending with us in charters.
I have one quick question. Slide, sorry to interrupt before you guys sign off. That last slide said something about fiscal year 24 projections or 25 projections. Was that on there?
They're not, they will be done by April 15th.
Thank
so
you.
Should be pretty sometime soon. And Marie, if you wanted, we could take these slides and turn them into PDF and we'd be more than happy to have those sent. And there should be links to all the bills in there. When we convert it to PDF, so you could just link on the bills as well.
Perfect. And we'll also send out a password protected copy of the meeting. So you can watch that and share that within your LEA as well. So.
Okay, great. It was good to be with you all. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Elise.
You're the best.
We sure appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, our afternoon, we have Holly here from School Land Trust for just a quick update. And then we've got a wonderful presentation with Doug Stump, who's going to be doing some great training about working with teachers. And that is put on by the Charter Association. So we'll turn it over to Holly, and then Shannon from the association will introduce Professor Stump. And so that is the rest of our afternoon today.
Thank you, Marie. So as I'm sharing my screen, this will probably be your last reminder for this school year for the requirements, as your upcoming plans are due on April 15th, which is Monday. We do have your LEA assurances. Those were mailed out in an email at the beginning of March. And we feel that we have created some confusion where it is not physically listed on the reporting website. So on the reporting website, that is where the principals submit their council membership as well as their assurance that the councils were seated according to law. Those are all due in October, and those are on the reporting website. The LEA assurance, this is a Qualtrics survey that has been sent out. That is what we need for each LEA. And as we are approving your plans, we will not be able to review the upcoming plan until this LEA assurance has been filled out. And so with that LEA assurance, just to remind you of everything that it is ensuring, is that all of the requirements of the School Land Trust program have been met. And that means that the Charter Trust Land Council type has been identified. The required website postings are on the school website. And that if there were any updates that needed to be made based on the website compliance review, that those were taken care of. And we may be doing a spot check. So again, this picture down in the bottom, this is the principal assurance and the council membership from October, and it is separate from the LEA assurance that the directors need to be filling out. This LEA assurance also ensures that training has been provided for all of the different parties that are involved in the program, and that the final report has been completed, submitted, and approved by all levels. One thing I wanted to mention is that when I pulled our responses earlier today, we are at 53% of charters have filled out this LEA assurance. So we really appreciate that. Again, we just want to make sure that we're clearing up any confusion that we may have caused on what this requires. And then with this, another piece of the LEA assurance is the council signature form, and that used to be housed on our reporting website, but now it is up to each LEA to create their own signature page. We do have templates on our website that you're welcome to use. And then just a reminder that only one LEA assurance needs to be filled out per LEA. So if you are a single satellite, it is the director that, or I guess a single location, not a single satellite, sorry, a single location, the director fills it out. And then if there are multiple campuses, it is the executive director that is going to be filling out one LEA per assurance, one assurance per LEA. And then again, with the council signature requirement, that is just the council members saying, yes, we were active participants in creating this upcoming plan. Please note that if your council is your governing board, they do not need to sign that they were part of it, because this signature form does go to the governing board upon plan review, and where they are the ones that are creating the plan, it's just not necessary. The timeline, we are now at the end of the year. So if you are still working on your upcoming plan, that's fine. Just please remember that it is needing to be approved by your business official no later than Monday, so we can look at it for funding in July. And then the last thing, just thank you. It's been such an amazing school year. We really appreciate the patience that you have given us as we have made the change to the roles of the business officials. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for getting your requirements completed on time. We really appreciate it. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Where we are starting to review plans, our group email, schoollandtrust@schools.utah.gov, is going to be where you get your most timely response. It does go to all three of us. So if you have any questions, I will do my best to answer those for you. Okay, so we have one in the chat. It says, quick clarification, the council member signature form should be presented with the new plan to the Board of Trustees when they approve it. Yes, that is correct. And then you will retain it at your school for 3 years because it will be asked for if there is a compliance review. Okay, So that's all I have for you. Again, thank you so much. Marie, if there's anything else, you can always email me.
Thank you, Holly. We appreciate it. All right, and we'll turn it over to Shannon.
Hey, thank you, Marie. It's good to be here with you. Today we have Dr. Doug Stump, and let me do a quick background and then lay out the discussion for us today, and then I'll turn the time to Dr. Stump. He has a career in education that includes 18 years in K-12 schools as a teacher, a mid-level administrator, as well as a head of school. He's got 14 years at the university level as an administrator and a faculty member, and as well as teaching undergraduate and master's and doctoral classes. He's currently teaching at Southern Utah University in the Educational Leadership Program, and he's helped us with several of our ACES classes. And that's where my experience with Dr. Stump has been. Today, and I'm thrilled that he's joining us today amidst the busy time of the university level. But today he's going to be talking to us and discussing with us developing master teachers and how important that is in our schools and with our teacher development. And just to give you a foundational idea as he steps into this discussion, the concept that he's going to be basing his discussion around is classroom teachers out of the face of schools to the community. What students and parents experience define the success of your school in many ways. So this seminar is going to address effective strategies in developing teachers into master practitioners as part of leading a highly successful school. So with that framework and all of the supporting documents that come with that, we're going to turn the time to Dr. Doug Stump and let him guide us through this conversation. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Shannon, thanks for that introduction. Real quick before I start, I just wanted to check what time should we make sure that I am wrapping up by?
Our goal is 3:30.
Okay. All right. So share my screen here with you. Okay, so as Shannon indicated in the introduction, we're talking about developing master teachers, and I have probably more material than we're going to have time for today, so I'll make sure that I will focus on some key aspects of what I'm going to present. And then I would say if there's an interest in a part 2, we can talk about what those strategies might look like if you would like a second part of this topic. So Shannon's already given me quite the introduction, so I appreciate that. And so we won't read through this slide, but I did want to share some takeaways from today. So you're not going to walk away with just a list of, if I do these 5 things and I'll have developed master teachers. That's not what we're talking about. Really what I want to talk about is understanding some key qualities of highly effective teachers, and then understanding the needs of 3 particular groups of teachers in your school, what I would call the novice teacher, the sufficient teacher, and then master teachers. And then the last thing is review ways to build in mentorship and support within your school to develop teachers into master teachers. So that's a broad overview of what we want to try to get through the next 35 minutes. Some things for you to be thinking about as I go through some of these slides, and you can even make some notes as we talk. How many teachers work in your school? How many would you designate as master teachers, people that are functioning at the highest level of the craft of teaching? How many teachers are in your school or in their first 3 years of teaching? And then be thinking about what issues with teaching practice have you come upon this year? Just have these floating around the back of your mind as we go through. Oops. So I was at a conference in my first year as an administrator, and I had taken over a school that was financially in peril. There's a chance that they may not reopen the following fall. I was hired November 1st, so we were already halfway through. We're partway through the fall semester. And the school had some significant issues. And so one of the first things I did that winter was attend a conference. And this was the first thing that the presenter had said to us, which is, your school is only as good as your worst teacher. I will tell you that this, I was probably in a state of panic for the rest of the presentation. I took some notes, but this sort of an alarming piece of information to read, because as soon as I saw this up on the slide, I began to think of the teachers that were underperforming in this school, and I knew that there was a lot of work to do. I don't necessarily agree that this is a true statement, but I do think that if you think of your school in terms of two things: one, your teacher is the face of your institution to the public. And so schools are not businesses. Businesses are businesses, and schools have business aspects to them, right? You have money that comes in, you have to allocate that money. But schools are their own unique institutions. They're unlike any other type of institution that we experience. But if I were to use business language here, your teachers are your product. What your customers, what your students and parents experience is the interface with the teachers. So they really are the most important people in your building. And so if you can think through what are some of the aspects that you've experienced this year of poor teaching, what are the effects of that? What kind of problems does that create for you as a director? You kind of get where this sentiment might be going. So let's define the teaching issues in your school. A school is a place of learning. That is its primary purpose. If you have wide gaps in teacher effectiveness, this can create what I would call systemic issues. You can have lopsided performance data. And if you have 2 third grade classes, you really want everyone that's in third grade to finish the year having accomplished pretty much the same thing. When you have wide gaps in teacher effectiveness, that's not always the case, which can create significant issues for you as a director, but also for your school. You can then that can translate into classroom assignments and parental preferences. So if you do have this one superstar 4th grade teacher, you probably experience what it's like to have parent after parent email you over the summer requesting that their child be in that classroom. And so one of the ways to push back against this is by raising the performance of all your teachers so that they're within a particular gap that's not too wide. You can also then have what I call fortress behavior from some teachers, which is all they really want to think about is what happens in their classroom. They don't want to think about the overall functions of the school, and they don't want to share ideas. They just want to perform well themselves. This can really erode the effectiveness of your overall program for sure. So these are some things that we can encounter as a school director that really does lends itself to thinking through how to develop master teachers in your school. So here are some qualities of highly effective teachers. And as you're looking at this list, think about the teachers in your school that may exhibit this. Hopefully you have some, but you may not have anyone that captures all of these things, which helps tell you where you are in your school's development. A highly effective teacher designs engaging, high-impact lessons. They connect classroom activities to curriculum. They are exceptional at pacing classes. If you've ever gone in to do an observation and it's a 50-minute class and the teacher spends the last 15 minutes on getting a head start on homework, that's not a well-paced class. That teacher has missed the opportunity to use all 50 minutes for instruction. And so a really good teacher, highly effective teacher, is really good at pacing classes. A highly effective teacher promotes caring and the support of fellow teachers. So not just what's happening in their classroom, but what others are doing. And then openly shares their ideas and what works well. Some other qualities of highly effective teachers. They understand the importance of reaching each student within the class. They don't just teach to the general audience, right? If there's 26 students in the class, they see 26 individuals, and each individual may have a slightly different learning need, and they're able to address those needs as they teach. A highly effective teacher proactively communicates well with parents. I say proactively, what that means is we don't wait until there's a problem and then wait for that problem to become extreme before picking up the phone or sending an email, or worse yet, sending a text, right? This person, highly effective, will reach out to parents before things become big issues, and will reach out to parents with positive news, not just negative news, and won't rely on text to communicate with parents. They set a positive tone, and they want to participate in the daily functions of the school. So they see their mission as not just teaching the students in their class. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, if you want to do some more reading on this idea of qualities of highly effective teachers, there's this book by James Strong, looks like this, Qualities of Effective Teachers. And one of the graphics in that book is this graphic here. These are the 6 areas of effectiveness. And so all of these things kind of help us understand, what is a teacher functioning at the master level look like? By the way, this conversation assumes that you are doing a good job of supervision and observation of your teachers every year. And so if this is not something that you're in the habit of doing regularly for all teachers, or you haven't really mapped that out yet, before you want to try to implement a mentorship program, you really want to try to first implement a really good, authentic assessment, observation, and evaluation system for your teachers. That's a separate topic, but you have to have that in place first before we move into how do we mentor good teachers. So I want to mention one more topic as we're framing this idea of what do highly effective or master teachers look like, and that's the idea of teacher dispositions. Some schools use them, some schools do not. And so my question here is, do you use teacher dispositions? And what this is a list of qualities, attributes, and habits you want all teachers to demonstrate. I like the idea of teacher dispositions because it provides a clearly understandable bullseye that all teachers are aiming for. It's a way to provide clarity about what your expectations are as an administrator. And so as we think about this idea of developing master teachers, I wanted to provide for you an example list of what some dispositions can look like. And some of these I've used in, some of these from this list I've used in a list created for schools where I've worked. So we want teachers to uphold the mission and vision of the school. And in charter schools, each charter school has its own unique mission and vision, right? You were founded for a particular purpose, and you would want all the teachers to be moving in that direction. We want teachers to confront conflicts and problems directly, demonstrating kindness and trust. We want teachers to show support and care for parents and consistently partners with parents on any issues. We want teachers to communicate continually and in a positive way with parents, sending out updates and is quick to convey good news. We want teachers to show no signs of favoritism with students or parents. We want teachers to take the time to know each child and invest in their lives. We want teachers to demonstrate a teachable spirit and humility. One of my hiring practices for teachers is to hire for the things that I cannot teach. So if I can teach someone how to teach math, but I can't teach someone necessarily how to have a heart to love children and how to have good classroom behavior elements in place, if that's something that, I feel like I can teach one but not the other, then you hire somebody who has the qualities that you can't teach them, assuming though that when you hire them, they're going to be open to instruction from you as the director or the instructional coach. You want teachers that foster safe, predictable, and supportive environments for students. We highly value the principles of trust, do no harm, and assume good intent. If you have ever worked in an institution where people in the office or in the classrooms do not assume good intent and do not trust one another and do not act from a position of do no harm, this can create havoc for you as an institution. It can create a lot of work. You want teachers that reflect a high degree of regard for the profession through dress and conduct. You want teachers that honors the confidentiality of school, student, and family information. And you want teachers that embrace reflection and renewal as yearly practices to improve the craft of teaching. So this list, like these 2 slides here, this is a sample list of dispositions. I'm not saying that please take this list and then implement them at your school. It may not work for your school, but I think an interesting exercise for you as a director when you have some downtime over the summer would be to have a conversation about, gosh, if we did put these in place, what would our list look like? What would we want to highly value in all of our teachers? Let me just pause there to see if, I know we don't have a lot of time here, but to see if there's anybody has any thoughts or questions before we move into the next section.
Doug, I really like what you said about how you hire. That's been something on my mind a lot lately as we look at around the state and try to find the best people to come and teach at our school. And that's been, you know, as you meet with people, I feel like that has been on the front of our minds. We want to find people who are qualified and ready to teach English or math, but we're also looking for a certain type of person. And there are things that you absolutely cannot teach someone, it seems, over 20 years of trying. So
yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that comment. I know, so I was a middle school English teacher at first. And I will tell you that when I moved into the principal's job, I could easily teach somebody to do a really good job teaching writing. So if they came to me and didn't know how to do that, that was okay. But, you know, there were these other qualities that were important to us that I needed to have somebody already come to the school with those things, like you were saying. Let's see. All right. Tess, thanks for that comment. We see it there. So I want to talk about 3 levels of teachers here. These are my words. You might have different words: novice, sufficient, and master teachers. Let's start with the middle. We're not going to spend a lot of time on these folks today. Not that they're not worthwhile, but that's not what this presentation is about. Sufficient teachers do a very good job of teaching. They do many of the things listed here adequately to lead their students through the learning journey. You usually do not need to worry about their performance. They usually do not create problems that find their way to you. And when this does happen, they're good about listing and fixing the issues. Sufficient teachers don't necessarily extend their influence to other teachers and have not perfected some of the qualities of master teaching, such as good mentorship or exceptional family relationships. There might be some piece of that they're missing. They may not participate in the overarching mission of the school at a school-wide level, but they're doing a good job in their classroom. You don't really generally have to worry about them. So novice teachers are typically within their first 3 years of teaching. They demonstrate proficiencies, so they understand what lesson plans are. They understand how to follow a lesson plan, but they've not mastered aspects of teaching like well-developed lesson plans, like pacing. They're still learning how to do that stuff. Novice teachers require more supervision and guidance, and they are also fragile as a group. They need support and a system of finding success to ensure they persevere in the profession. You know, I think we talk a lot about the first 3 years as an important aspect to teaching, because a lot of folks will decide that this is not their profession within those 3 years. And as we know, the first 3 years can be really stressful as a new teacher. There's so much to learn. And even if you've been teaching for 20 years, the first 2 weeks of the school year, you sleep like no other weeks of the school year, right? It is a challenging job, even if you've done it for a long time. So these novice teachers are going to make mistakes. They will say the wrong things to students and parents. They will lack good assessment practices. They may not see the broader or deeper issues of student success. They may be too forceful or too relaxed with enforcing rules, and they will show signs of significant stress. And they're also susceptible to negative influences, right? And you don't have to be within your first 3 years to demonstrate this aspect of being a novice teacher. If you've never been taught and mentored, you could stay in this place for a long time. So let's take a look at what are master teachers. They demonstrate all the qualities that we've talked about up to this point. They are teachers that you want to stay in your school until they retire. You want them to be part of your program. You want them to influence other teachers. They often, though, want to be rewarded for their mastery through recognition, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. And moving into mentorship can be a way to reward master teachers and spread their influence. And you can do this in an informal way, right? So if you have a new second grade teacher, but there's this really amazing teacher down the hall that's just been doing this for a long time, you might just say, hey, can you go take your lesson planning period and just go sit in on that person's class. That's a low stakes, low level way to try to influence a new teacher. But what we want to talk about is developing a system of robust development. How do we formalize this? And then how do we reward master teachers for this level of performance? And so there's lots of research on the aspect of mentorship in schools. And so, like I said, there can be a part 2 to this conversation. But what I'm going to try to do in the next 15 minutes or so is just make some overall summary statements about how this could look for your school. So first, I think defining role clarity is really important. When we talk about mentoring, it's important that folks understand that this isn't supervision or evaluation, right? This is skills development. You want the mentor teacher to feel free to be involved and provide guidance without feeling the need to evaluate and report back. You want the novice teacher to build trust with the mentor teacher and know it's okay to mess up and try things out, right? This is the mentor relationship should be distinct from your evaluation supervision relationship. You want to invite enthusiasm. So I have to tell you, I love teaching. This is just Doug talking here. I think it's the best job in the world. I've done lots of different jobs in schools, and one of the reasons I love what I do at SUU is I get to teach still, right? I get to teach and I get to teach about leadership. So those are my 2 favorite things. I also love classrooms. I think they're amazing spaces. They're this really interesting place that we get to go to work every day. And I love setting them up. I love cleaning them out in May. I love thinking about new ways to make my classroom an inviting place. So this really is an amazing job. And you want people who are mentors who love what they do and can share that enthusiasm with novice teachers. Because a novice teacher will feel overwhelmed, they will cry, they will sleep hard on weekends, and they're going to struggle. And so to have somebody show them that, yes, it's hard, but as you begin to master different elements of this job, you do get to a point where you get to experience more joy, and that is really rewarding. A mentor teacher can be open about loving the job, and sharing that love goes a long way. So I think the first thing I would mention here about the mentoring process is establishing norms for your school. This relationship can be a great way to teach new teachers how the school functions and how relationships among teachers should exist. We know that not all teachers are team players. Not all teachers enjoy their work. Not all teachers want to collaborate. So we want to put in place a formal mentor system so that as new teachers come in, they learn the things that you want them to learn, right? You want to demonstrate what does it mean to be highly collaborative and enjoy your work. And how can this mentor teacher demonstrate who we want to be as a school? And the nice thing is over time, that influence grows within your school. It doesn't happen in 1 or 2 years, but over time, your school does feel like a different place. And it's because you have this mentor relationship for novice teachers. So I think as you think about how this might look in your school, The first step is to identify who those master teachers might be. Great test scores do not automatically qualify a teacher to be a mentor. You want a mentor who embodies your values. And so that kind of goes back to those slides. And I know we've gone through this fairly quickly today. And so Shannon, I can share this slide deck with you, and then you can distribute it out in case there's anything that people wanted to grab from here. You're certainly welcome to take it and use it. But, you know, you want somebody that, yes, their students are performing well, but there's so much more to being a highly effective teacher in your school, right? So think through, are there teachers in your building that satisfy this definition that you can consider to be master teachers? And so here's the next thing. You really, this is not going to work unless you reward your mentor teachers. This is extra work. And so it's been my experience that, I mean, money is always nice, but money is not always available, right? And so what are ways that you can use to make this meaningful for your mentoring teacher? So here's some things that I've done in schools where I've worked before. If you were designated as a master teacher, you no longer were observed. You know, if you're functioning at a high level, I don't need to evaluate you every year. Matter of fact, I might help, you know, I might ask you to help in some other aspect. You also don't need to turn in your lesson plans. You've demonstrated that you're exceptional at your lesson plans. You don't need to continue to write them every week and turn them into somebody. That's just comes busy work for people that are really high functioning, right? And so there's still an evaluative process, but it's going to be different than if you're in your first 3 years of teaching. I think giving somebody a release from traditional teacher duties makes sense. If you're going to ask them to take a new teacher under their wing and set up structured meetings with these people throughout the year, maybe they don't have to do carpool. Maybe they don't have to do lunch. Maybe they don't have to be a hall monitor on their planning periods. Find ways for this to feel like a reward for their hard work and their mastery of this craft. And you can establish standards for mentor teachers that are different from others. And I have mentioned time here as well. I think one of the nice things about charter schools is your flexibility. And this is probably going to take some extra time for prep. And so I've handled this a couple of different ways. If it was a middle school teacher or a secondary school teacher and they had a course load of, and typically in an 8-period week, so I'm thinking about a block schedule here where there's 4 instructional periods per day. Typically what we had was 2 planning periods, 1 service period, and 5 classes. And if that's the rotation for a mentor teacher, I might back them down 1 class and take away that service. So they had 2 planning periods for their teaching and then 2 planning periods to dedicate toward mentoring. And same pay, right? We also did, you know, we've also used things like incentivized days off. So if they put in extra hours, they were able to be compensated through comp time, or we didn't call it that because that's a specific term. We used a different term, but it worked for our school. We were able to put it in place, and it, you know, we weren't violating any rules, and it worked really well, and people really appreciated it. Because really what you're saying to them is, I know this takes an extra amount of time, and I want to recognize that. That's important. So whatever works for you, just recognize that rewarding your mentors and being able to compensate them in some way will be important for them to buy into this idea that they're going to take on the role of mentor in their school. And so I would also recommend developing a written mentor system. And so I think this is kind of where that part 2 to this conversation might come into play somewhere down the line. You know, maybe if it's of interest, we can put something together in the fall. But there are sample mentor programs out there. But I think it's important, even if you write it yourself, and even if it's just a couple of pages long, this does not have to be its own handbook. But you do want to define, what are the roles? How do we define a mentor teacher? So teachers can know how they're selected for this. How do we define the different levels of engagement? You also want to define deadlines and expectations, right? So if you're a mentor teacher and you have these 2 new teachers in your building and you're going to be mentoring them, how often do you meet with them? How often do you go and sit in their class and see what they're doing as a mentor teacher? How often do you set deadlines for them to create work for you as the master teacher? And I'm also a big fan of taking new teachers and giving them release and having them go sit in somebody else's class. You know, again, you can do that without putting in a mentor system, but if you have somebody who's mentoring, then maybe they participate in selecting who in the school building these new teachers are observing. So you bring in a sub, it's low cost, and then that teacher spends a day or half a day in someone else's classroom. So you maintain, as the director, your observation and evaluation role, right? And I think that if a new teacher has a mentor, that then they have somebody built in that they can trust, that they can turn to and talk about the observation process. And it preserves you and your role of evaluation. I also like the idea of including mentor teachers on your hiring team. If we're going to ask these folks to take first-year teachers under their wing, it'd be great to have their input on the interviews, right? So again, you don't have to, but I think it's a way for that to feel like an elevated role for those folks. So we've gone through this really quickly. Again, this is just an overview of this concept, but some takeaways that I would land on for today for you would be, how would you define the qualities of a highly effective or master teacher in your school? Every school's different. How would you divide your teachers into groups, right? So think about your teachers in your school building, who would fall into each category. How are these 3 groups served in your school? You know, do you have an official way of serving novice teachers that's different than sufficient, that's different than master teachers? And then how could you build a mentor program within your school? How would that start? And who would you get around the table to have a conversation about this? So again, I know that's pretty quick, but let me just stop sharing for a minute and we have about 5 minutes for questions or conversation. Happy to have folks share things that they've done as well.
Hey, I've got something to add. Thanks, Doug, for that. I always appreciate this because I feel like as I listen, I think this is all stuff that we'd love to do all the time. And then I think about what it looks like in the school day and in a, I look at the way charters function where we're kind of trying to do all the things that a district does. So people are each doing 5 things already. And so I always look at this and then like, okay, I can take that piece and do that little piece here and that little piece there. But it never seems like I can do the coherent whole in the way that I always want to. And I don't know if other directors feel that way, but that's I guess the frustration that I feel just as a director and trying to find, what are the pieces of this that I can make work within a sort of economy of scarcity, time and people.
Would love to hear if anyone else has thoughts. I can add a few comments, but I don't need to jump right in.
It's at least gratifying to know that maybe other people feel that same pressure. And I think about times in my career when things like this have worked really well, and it's often come back to funding and personnel, right? I think we all have great intentions to support our teachers and wanting to do that the best we can, and just trying to find, how do we do that on a dime? So.
At the first school where I was head of school, it was definitely a razor thin budget for us. I just couldn't go out and I couldn't hire an instructional coach, for example. We didn't have the funds for that. Would have been great. We didn't. And I knew that I couldn't mentor all the teachers that needed mentoring. And so part of my dipping my toe into this world of developing master teachers was so that I could spread the work out a little bit, right? And so I think it wouldn't have worked effectively if I had had the time on my schedule to be a mentor, because I'm also the person that evaluates, and that sets up a conflicting relationship. But I think it did take some work off of my desk, actually, if I could initiate these relationships within my school, because a novice teacher that's mentored well and a master teacher that's recognized for that and can spread influence eliminates things that end up coming to my office, right? And so my first year was kind of chaos there because everything was kind of out of control, but my second year was way better and third year was fantastic. And so as we got deeper and deeper into this more, developing master teachers and then having master teachers mentor new teachers, what we noticed was just the level of stress for teachers in general had come down, and the wide gap of, or the wide spectrum of just stuff that shouldn't happen in classrooms that end up creating problems for us as administrators really kind of came down as well. So yeah, it can be difficult when you don't have somebody that you can identify and kind of pay extra for that. But even if you can start on a small scale, it might actually end up benefiting your administrative team in terms of their workload.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just add a thank you as well. I do appreciate it. I would love to have the slides. And also, I think I put it in the chat, but I wonder if other charter schools do have those lists of teacher dispositions. As I suggested, we have some form of it that we did together as we were defining our core beliefs about teaching and learning. And I've sort of thought about how I'm going to integrate that into sort of the formative as well as summative assessment process or an evaluation process. But I would love it if other charter schools have those, if we could share those, because I appreciate it. And I think it's a good concept, and we can engage our entire staff in thinking about those, right? Reflecting on them as part of the self-reflection I ask them to do every year anyway.
Rebecca, I would love if you were in a position to drop that in the group chat or send it and we can do some kind of a follow-up email. So Rebecca mentioned in the group chat that she would be happy to share the form that they use. So we'll give her a minute to pull that up. As she's doing that, Doug, thank you for spending the afternoon with us.
Oh yeah, happy to help.
Particularly after a long discussion of policy and new changes coming down from the state legislature. We appreciate your flexibility and presenting this with us, and let's you and I talk about an opportunity you might have to join us again for some kind of training in the fall where we can build on the things that we've discussed today. Thanks, Rebecca, in that chat. Sorry.
That would be great. I second everything. So absolutely a wonderful meeting, a full meeting. So thank you everyone for sticking with us today, and we'll go ahead and end here. So